This is Deep Dish Conversations, a series in which I, Jerome Moore, sits down with prominent figures in Nashville, Tennessee to talk about social issues over amazing deep dish pizza. Deep Dish Conversations models how to have conversations about deep issues around racism, housing, policing, poverty, and more. Plus, you will get an idea for where to get your next slice of pizza from. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy Deep Dish Conversations. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Deep Dish Conversations, and we got the famous Dr. Sekou Franklin, my old professor at MTSU, Blue Raiders, alumni on this side. Learned a lot from Dr. Franklin, and I just got to read through just some of the stuff. I can't even memorize how much stuff because it's ridiculous. So he's a professor of political science at MTSU, author. One of the books, After the Rebellion, Black Youth Social Movement Activism. Another book in the post-civil rights generation. And edited the State of Blacks in Middle Tennessee. Involved in a community oversight board now, Urban Epicenter, Tennessee Citizens Action, Tennessee Alliance for Progress, Ad Hoc Committee for Equity, Tennessee Care Saves Lives Coalition, National Black Convenient Coalition, Justice for Jefferson Street Coalition. It goes on and on. It goes on and on. So, Dr. Franklin, I appreciate you having it. Appreciate you.
Goes back years, like 15 plus years.
So, what? So, you're originally from California, right?
California.
What part of California?
Bay Area.
Bay Area. Okay. How was it growing up in the Bay Area for you?
The Bay Area was interesting. I tell people, the Bay Area has different sides to it. I grew up in the South Bay,
okay.
San Jose, which was more of the area I grew up in was more of it would probably be more reflective of Antioch. It was multi-racial, multi-cultural.
Okay. The old Antioch or the new Antioch? Where's Antioch? Which Antioch you talking about?
Sure. It was the United Nations.
Okay. Antioch is wild now.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was the United Nations, and then in that respect of more diverse in terms of multilingual immigrants.
Okay.
A lot of Latino.
Okay.
There was a lot of Latinx community folks, Asian.
Okay.
And then you got I lived for a short while. As I got older, in San Francisco, which has its own cultural anchors.
Right.
I lived in the East Bay, which is the open side for just a tad bit to get some mentoring on both that area with young people.
Okay.
And then in between those stops, I left when I was in my mid-20s, but in between those stops, I coached track.
You played football, didn't you?
Football.
Yeah, you went to college and played football, right? See, y'all people maybe didn't know that. Dr. Frank was on that field.
I coached track. I was also a substitute teacher.
Okay.
In two school districts.
Okay.
One was the Hayward Unified District, which is on the East Bay.
Okay.
Which is a town that's not too far from Oakland.
Okay.
And I was a substitute teacher in Daly City, which is a town right next to San Francisco. So, in between all those stops, the Freedom Schools in the East Bay as well.
Okay.
Oakland and coached track in San Jose. So I was all over the place between ages 20 and
Dr. Franklin everywhere. So what influences were around you, as far as like parents or anything that made you want to get into this work?
Well, as I look back, what may have as a young kid in junior high school, a group came out to my junior high school and brought a lot of the young people together for, I guess it was a mentoring organization.
Okay.
It probably had a long-term influence on me. I'm not entirely sure, but we did actually we organized an event at 13, 14. I was in 8th grade at the time. Some 7th grade, younger.
Right.
So we organized a community event, and I say that maybe that had a large and long-term influence on me, but I'm not necessarily sure. And then as I got older, I did more mentoring with young people.
Right.
Maybe God's blessing or luck stumbled into some networks of activists
Mm-hmm.
that had an influence on me
Right.
as well, and pretty much that was my pathway. It wasn't like a linear pathway.
Right.
It was if you had asked me when I was in college, for example,
Right.
doing this work, I don't know if I would say that.
Right.
I always wanted to do community work. Coming into college,
Right.
the first year of college, I always communicated that to my advisors. I wanted to do community work.
Right.
I never thought I would leave California, but
Right.
now I'm almost to the point where I've lived the same amount of time outside of California as I
You did inside California.
But I never thought I would do this kind of expansive work,
Right.
and really never thought I'd be, in conversation with people who I would read about.
Right.
In conversation with them.
Right.
So,
And people are reading about you now.
Yeah, I guess so.
Right.
So, but that does a lot of things because, one of the critical things was that as a college student, I was fortunate enough to work with a group of a national network of young black activists,
Uh-huh.
and it was the first iteration of what was called the Children's Defense Fund, but it was really the Children's Defense Fund had a network of organizations co-coordinated by the Black Community Crusade for Children,
Okay.
and the Black Student Leadership Network.
Okay.
And it was the first iteration of kind of post-1960s freedom schools that were established across the country. And so I worked freedom schools in
Right.
East Bay in Oakland for 4 summers straight.
What did your parents do? Like, were they involved in community work or?
Not particularly. It was just
Right.
something that I just for the most part was able to.
It just came to. It just happened to.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Right.
I can't really. I have no real explanation.
Right.
Like I wasn't
Right.
like on in protest and
Right.
as a kid. There's no real explanation other than. Of course, you read about it.
Right.
You're fascinated about it.
Right.
And even the work that I do now, I can't say that it was planned that I do
Right.
it now. I mean, I always envisioned that I would, as a professor, I would be involved in community work, but not like this work.
Right,
Also
right.
Work that's,
Because as a professor, you're really like ground roots.
yeah,
like.
but again, I never. It was never
Right.
really like I'm going to do this. And
Right.
this, and
Right.
this, and
Just kind of
I-
fell into things.
Yeah, I would have probably envisioned. There's an older political scientist who I admire who graduated from Fisk University, by the way.
Okay.
His name is Ronald Walters, and anyone who's in their 60s and above, in the academy will know who he is. He's since passed, and from like the early 1970s to really the time of his passing, he was involved as a political scientist. He was the chair of the Howard University's political science department.
Okay.
He was involved in almost every single black political formation
Wow.
entity. The Black Congressional Black Caucus,
Wow.
Black Political Roundtable,
Wow.
Black Political Convention movement.
Right.
There's all this kind of history of
Right.
black politics, often advising, members of Congress. So I kind of envisioned myself
Right.
doing something like that.
Okay.
But Tennessee culture, where I settled in, is really not. That's not really what Tennessee culture is.
So
I never really.
I want to.
Myself being in this kind of space.
I want to talk a little bit about that transition from California to Tennessee, West Coast to South, and kind of your perspective on the different experiences that people have, especially on the racial lines, because if you only lived in the South, even if you look at the movies and stuff, everything is geared when you talking about black and white racism, civil rights, and just movements. And people know about the Black Panther Party as far as out of California, but and like Cesar Chavez and some of those, Latinx, movements. But when we talk about embedded in like just racism and always got something going on, people just refer to like as this the South. Well, and it's popularized and commercialized in that way. But living in both the South and growing up in California, what would be like the two? Well, how would you compare and contrast?
Well, I should say that my pathway was not a straight line to Tennessee. My pathway
Right.
was California, Northern California to D.C.
Okay.
Where I went to graduate school.
Okay.
I went to graduate school in California too as well. And then I went to Illinois for a year.
Okay.
Champaign, Urbana. Then I went to Massachusetts. For years. Then I
Right.
came down here.
Okay.
So it's not a straight path there. But it depends on you ask. One thing about California that folks should note is that my generation
Right.
and older, most of our folks came out of the South.
Okay.
So if you were to go from Seattle all the way down to Los Angeles,
Right.
all the West Coast region,
Right.
many black folks came there between the 40s and the 60s.
Okay.
So the southern root, so to speak, is, although we're not from there, the southern roots
is
are
ingrained,
in us
right?
because Our folks are from there. Folks are first or second generation West Coast folks, and in the Bay Area, many of our folks come out of the Texas and Louisiana
Okay.
entity. But I think the South has the Bay Area, the Northern California is, in terms of activism, you're able to move without a paternalism.
Okay.
So you're more free.
Right.
It's less traditionalistic.
Right.
You don't necessarily have to abide by mores and kind of the status quo. Harold Cruz wrote about this, which was why the Panther Party came out of the Bay Area, so to speak, versus, say, for example,
the South.
The Panther Party, as we know it.
Would the Panther Party been able to do what they did in California if it had branched out of the South?
Well, there was a Panther Party movement in the South. The Panther Party, as we know it, there was an original Panther Party that came out of Lowndes County, which is what Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, and others really took the name from.
Right.
Having said that, the Panther Party, as we know it, that is a Panther Party as birthed in the West Coast by Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, and
right.
on.
Yeah, you're right.
Some of the people that I was influenced by early on were the Panther Party. They did have a Southern wing.
Okay.
A Southern wing in places like Winston-Salem.
Okay.
A very active wing.
Okay.
Like there was a Panther Party guy, the Chattanooga man. So there was a, but in terms of it being birthed the way that the Panther Party, it's hard to say. I mean, because there was a black radical movement in the South that's often submerged in this kind of civil rights narrative.
Right.
There were groups like there's a group that I write about here called the Student Organization for Black Unity, or SOBU.
Okay.
Which ultimately took on the name called Youth Organization for Black Unity.
Okay.
So there were pockets of what's called black radicalism in the South. Before that, going back 3 decades earlier, there was the Sharecroppers Union, the Southern Tenant Farmers Union. There was a group that I write about in this book called the Southern Negro Youth Congress.
Okay.
So, and even when it comes to how we define radicalism, I often push back. As I've gotten older, I've often pushed back against distinguishing between a Panther radicalism, which is now popularized by Fred Hampton, and a King radicalism or a SNCC radicalism.
Right.
There's nothing more radical than going into the Mississippi Delta, Alabama Black Belt, organizing black low-wage workers. There's nothing more radical to that. In the face of racial terrorism. And so that in and of itself is just as radical as the Panther Party.
And that's a good point that you bring up. And that's why I asked, could the Black Panther Party be birthed out of the South? Because the perception is it was just more dangerous to even do anything and be as free as you can be in California, to be in like a place like Alabama or South of North Carolina or even Tennessee. Because of this notion, like they was hanging and killing folks, like they was not playing any games.
Two things I will answer that. It was one of the things that came up in the '68 protest of the Olympics, where the protesters, John Carlos, Tommy Smith, Harry Edwards was out there too as well. A lot of those folks came out of San Jose State, my hometown, and others. And then so when they organized the protests in the '68 Olympics, some of the athletes from the South were saying, I got to go back to Alabama. So there is that, but I think that that I think the way to look at it from the standpoint of could the Panther Party have been,
Right.
I think the way to look at it is that what California offered folks was, I mean, Huey Newton was a Southerner.
Mm-hmm.
Huey Newton came out of, he was born in Louisiana,
Right.
and then moved to the Bay Area. The iteration of the Panther Party, many of them were Southerners who came to California at 2, 3, 5 years old,
Right.
as teenagers, or their parents had just moved right before.
Right. So they was aware. They knew. Yeah. Yeah.
What California had, what the Bay Area had in particular, which is often again lost in the discussion, is California had the Bay Area had a robust black progressive movement that preceded the Panthers.
Okay.
The Brotherhood for Sleeping Car Porters were very active.
Right.
They had a group of black longshoremen, men and women who were very active.
Right.
And in many respects, the Panther Party members, the way I would see it,
Right.
you can line up 10 academicians, 10
Right.
scholars, and they're going to see it differently.
Right.
I think I know a lot more about the Panther Party
Right.
because my mentor was there at Laney College.
Right.
The Panther Party was started.
Right, right.
Although he was not a Panther Party. He was
Right.
there and spoke at Huey Newton's funeral.
Okay.
I think that the Panther Party, the way I would see it is that you get to, it's kind of like you almost made it to the promised land.
Right.
You see it, but you can't get there.
Right.
And if you see the promised land and you can't get there, then it makes you more heightened politically. And I think a lot of that was in some of those Panther Party members, because there's this scene where Huey Newton as a kid gets a present from his daddy,
Right.
and they have no money, and
Right.
it's like just a small change or whatever. He
Right.
throws it back, whatever.
Right.
And risk poetic. I'm free. I'm going to be free.
Right.
I'm not going to suffer. I'm going to be free.
Right. Right.
Liberated.
Right.
And so a lot of that was in
Right.
in the Panther Party. So I think it's more complicated than just
Right.
operating in the South versus
Right.
because they killed in the Bay Area. I mean,
You're right.
the police officers that were in Oakland and Richmond. They were tough. I mean, many of them were from the South.
Right.
I mean, if you read the early Panther Party literature, you'll find out that the police officers would come into your home.
Right.
They wouldn't abide by any civil liberty protections. I
Right.
mean, they were quite brutal.
Right.
And that's in many respects what they were responding.
Right. And I think if you wasn't from California, but you listen to hip hop, especially NWA, they kind of brought that out through music and letting you like, hey, we getting the shit beat out of us by police. And I think they kind of brought a lot of awareness and like Public Enemy, and this that time of rap and others like brought if you wasn't living in New York, if you wasn't living in the West Coast, you could hear those stories through hip hop. So I want to move down to the good old Nashville. You do a lot of work here, academically and also grassroots. What the hell is going on in Nashville? And let's get straight to it. Let's deep this conversation. What is going on, Dr. Franklin? It's just like, we got housing problems, we got policing problem, budget problems. There's a lot of problems socially around social justice and what that means and what that looks like here in Nashville. So what's your quick take on that? And then let's dive into some specifics. But what is your quick take on just what's going on?
I mean,
or what's not going on?
Nashville's operating in a way that, if I can use a word broadly defined, that the city's establishment wanted to operate.
Right.
But it's a little bit different now than it was 20 years ago. Nashville is a pro-growth city that prioritizes accelerated economic development and boosterism, that is boosting Nashville's image,
Right.
not just locally but nationally.
Right.
And everything else takes second place to that.
Right.
And so housing equity issues.
Right.
It's boosting Nashville's image as a pro-growth city, so that it can attract, so that they can build a convention center. And
Right.
build, in this area where we're sitting in right here, there's probably, I would just dare to say, at least $1 billion worth of investments
Right.
just in this.
Minimum. Yeah, for sure.
Creates downward pressure everything else around Nashville,
Right.
extending to Murfreesboro.
Right.
And that downward pressure means that, real estate goes up.
Right.
You got to have new people coming to the city.
Right.
To attract them to pay off taxes.
Right.
So Nashville's operating the way that the city leadership established, designed it to, which means that it prioritizes pro-growth economic development, and the poor people are disposed.
You're finna say who benefits and who suffers because of this?
Well, we know who suffers. Who suffers are the least of these.
Right. Right.
Disproportionately, people of color, and
Right.
black folks,
Right.
who can't afford to stay here, who can't afford to live here,
Right.
Who's benefiting from this? It's the investor class.
Right.
Investors, it's realtors, it's
Right.
developers, maybe a small group of black folks who are invited into this space
Right.
through contracts and agreements and kind of status.
Bring out the
But
pizza. Appreciate it, boss.
That's basically what Nashville is, and you find the same thing, unfortunately, in the last decade or so since you were at MTSU.
Right.
If you look at when you were at MTSU, and if you were to look at now, there's been dozens of cities that have undergone this.
Right.
You go even to Seattle and find this.
Right.
You go to San Francisco. When I left
Right.
San Francisco, it's entirely changed.
Right.
When I left the East Bay, it's entirely changed.
Right.
You can go to D.C. When I
Right.
left D.C. in 2001, I left D.C.'s entirely changed. So
Come
these
on,
cities
boss.
have become kind of pro-growth booster
Yeah.
cities, prioritizing economic development that privileges just a handful of people,
Cool.
from my perspective at least.
Okay. We got this deep dish conversation with the deep dish pizza coming out here. Hope you ain't had breakfast. What's going on, everybody? This is your host and creator of Deep Dish Conversation, Jerome Moore, and I know you're enjoying this episode that you're watching currently. Make sure you hit that notification button and hit subscribe so you won't miss any of these amazing episodes. I appreciate y'all. Thank you for all love and support, and continue watching the episode. I'll holler. How you like the pizza? Is good?
Very
That's good. Yeah, say something for the daughters.
Well, Bucky Carter is deserving of a movie and a documentary.
Mm-hmm.
He was the person who, I think even Huey Newton and them, Bobby Seale,
Right.
David Heard, even they said this guy had the factor.
Yeah,
And
right.
He was killed
Yeah.
at 26 years old.
Man, so going back to Nashville and the problems that Nashville has going on, what are some solutions? Because I think people always, especially black folks, people of color, that are being affected the most, harmed in various ways, physically and economically, socially. What are some solutions that we must do for ourselves? That clearly, I don't know if you've seen it, but the council got blew up by I think the people's budget. I think it was maybe a mixture of the people's budget and the National Black Assembly. Because again, they're ignoring the fact of what the people want and giving more money to the police. And I guess what can we do? I'm saying we can vote, but it's like they keep doing it's a repetitive, habitual thing. What can and for me, it's when you have other black folks, other people of color in those positions, that in decision-making positions that are also participating in these decisions. And it's like, damn, it's like, what? So speak to us, Dr. Frank.
I'll get jumped on if I don't say this. I think the council blow up was initiated because the security went after the Mosaic.
Okay.
People had signs, and then that's when the Black Movement Assembly folks stood up and said, "You guys the security's up here going after folks." And then the way that the media reinterpreted the story,
okay.
and the way that council members reinterpreted the story were these loud black folks,
right?
But they were actually coming to the defense of solidarity,
right?
But I think it's a tough thing. On the surface, you could say, yeah, we need as much investment in how affordable and workforce housing as we have in the region, which would be $150, $200 million, maybe War.
Right.
I mean, we can, the Black Movement Assembly has put together an agenda and what can be done about it. But on another level, I mean, alternative news information sources
Right.
are important. One of the things that there's a minister activist, Jeff Carr, stated in one of his commentaries was, 30 years ago, you had multiple black media sources out there that were communicating information. So things like this are important to really offer an alternative framework of how black folks feel.
Right.
I think is one thing. I think, really reimagining public policy, taking the ideas from people, young people, such as the Nashville Movement Assembly.
Right.
I know that.
But how much power? But this is not. How much power, or how can we use the power of the people to really create these changes, especially when these people that's in power, they actually have the decisions to make, are not doing them? It's like we creating these coalitions. We getting. It's like, but it's like they're literally just ignoring.
The coalitions are going to have to the coalitions. It's going to be twofold. One is the internal kind of constructive programs, like the feeding programs, like Janisha Harris is doing, the alternative media that you're doing, the anti-violence intervention work that you're doing. But the external part of challenging systemic racism and the structure that continue to put their neck on the foot on the neck of black folks. Really, what's going on? That's going to take a more experimental and aggressive mass action. It just will.
How do we get to because
we haven't tried most of what's available to us. I'll give you an example. We haven't tried. What if in the council debate, 100 graduates from Pearl High, not Pearl Cone, Pearl High, okay, you know what that means.
Exactly.
What if they went in and engaged in a sustained sit-in in the council? Okay, that's a different look than, say, young people, because the minute that those folks are hauled off by police, there's not one minister, one black minister who will stand for that.
That's different optics, different drama to take.
Not one black minister, not even the black minister who celebrates it for herself for going over and talking to the mayor, who will be able to go to that Sunday morning service, seeing Pearl High black folks, class of 1960, getting hauled out by police because their kids are being forced out of the city. So there's multiple kinds of pressure points that we can provide that we haven't even tried in the city. That we haven't even tried. We've tried, the rallies, the protesting, and the system adjusts. The system can adjust to a rally. Kind of multiple kinds of forms of civil resistance. Hundreds of those we haven't even tried. And I think that kind of mass action is gonna be what it takes to. Not maybe not that one, but things like that is going to be what it takes to actually consistent multiple
events,
multiple pressure.
And I mentioned something similar. I can't remember if I mentioned it last season where I was talking to somebody in just in private, but it's statistically proven that our black kids, the public school system is not geared for our black kids. It just ain't. Expulsion rates ridiculous. What about something more so what you're talking about? If black parents started taking their kids out of schools and homeschooling them, but with the help of, we have Meharry, we got FIS, we have TSU participating in that, say, hey, we have all the facilities for kids to still get science, math, reading in a place, or even our churches. Most churches got gymnasiums with retired teachers and things like that. If 1,000 black parents took out their kids, and let's say it's 1-for-1, 1,000 black kids out of school and start homeschooling them until they start changing policies and start just really systematically changing the education or how black kids are being educated, city will lose money.
Yeah. That's
Excuse
a
me.
form of what's called in a nonviolent, which is kind of come out of nonviolent. That's a form of what's called non-cooperation.
You're right. We need more of that. We need right. It's just that's harming you.
Because basically the system that's harming us, the system is able to get away with it because
we keep participating. How do we convince our parents? Because I have a son now, 1 year old, and there's no way that I'm sending him to public school. It's our homeschool. There's no way. I just refuse to participate in a system that I know it's not looking out for his best interest. What message can we get across to black parents, especially the black parents that are looking at this now? Is that the best step for them to do?
I would say,
or
I don't know if that's the best step. I mean, I will say I am a fan of public investment because there's no group
right
across the country. There's no group that benefits from a public investment and intervention in black folks. We are the ones who benefit from a public transit system. We are the ones who benefit from housing, from environmental intervention. I think that if there's as a form of bringing pressure to bear on the system, we practice forms of non-cooperation, in the way that you mentioned, that's kind of organized, strategic. I think that's possibly a better option, as part of a broader campaign of nonviolent resistance.
Do we ever get to a point where we say, okay, most of us don't come from generational wealth. Mm-hmm. Most of us starting from the ground up and have to build that. Like even to my point, my parents still had to start from the ground. And my mom, that 70s, 60s, still having to. So therefore, I have to get it from where they kind of raise it up a little bit, and I have to take it there. Is there a point to where we're relying on the system, the same system that's harming us, historically has harmed us, to correct it? Could that possibly happen? And should we say we just have to create our own economic systems, our own schools, our own essential businesses, and those things, and just really completely remove ourselves slowly? It's hard to do it all at once because we don't have these essential businesses to participate in immediately, or it's not a lot of black-owned businesses or operated businesses. But do we come to a point as black folks, or even other people of color, that we say, well, Latinx people do it, Asians do it, other minorities, they practice, community economics to a high degree. Is there a point where black folks say, okay, look, clearly we can keep fighting, we can keep pushing for policy changes, but even with policy changes, they're still killing us, they're still leaving us out economically. Do we just need to build our own system parallel to the one that we're currently living in?
Well, the best way I would answer that is, again, you got diverse viewpoints. I don't think that those things have to be mutually exclusive. I think you can build an internal community infrastructure to deal with multiple entry points of inequality and I don't like the word self-help, but I always call it community resistance, community reliance. And then you can also bring pressure to bear on a system that's also harming us. I think we have to think about how those two things are connected. So, for example, if you have, it's very hard in cities to organize a self-reliant black community in which the cities are in charge of property taxes, they're in charge of zoning codes. So there has to be, or in the case of Black Wall Street, the city could, the state, the government could enact a reprisal campaign. And so, the Negro baseball leagues, Black Wall Street. We had a history in the early 20th century of mutual aid societies. Those are, and probably many more, those are examples in which black folks did something akin to what you're saying, but especially if they're successful, which the system has a way of enacting reprisals and so forth. So
is the system, will the system ever allow that to completely happen? Because it sounds like it's not. It's just even when we hit another level, they find a way systemically to say, okay, nah, y'all getting too far ahead, or
no, I think things are more interdependent. I think that how a city, I think that if you had black folks who en masse, for for a decade pulled their kids out of public school,
Right.
and you know, developed an internal kind of, you know, business economy, so to speak.
Right.
I think the city, you know, the city's still going to be in charge of
Right.
you know, land use, property
Right,
tax,
right,
zoning,
right.
codes, tax and refinement, a whole
Right,
range of things. So
right.
it's not to discourage that. What
Right.
I'm saying is that there has to be a connective tissue between internally organizing the community in the way that you're talking about, and still mobilizing pressure in those public institutions,
Right.
in the same way you're about. Just like it wasn't just the Panther Party,
Right.
but SNCC.
Right.
I have an article. I have a letter from Amelia Boynton, who was in Selma, and, you know, and she played Oprah Winfrey played her in the movie Selma.
Right.
I had a letter where she's writing the SCLC leadership, saying that she has basically a factory that she wants to develop in Selma to
Right.
deal with black unemployment.
Right.
So just like, for example,
Right.
you know, you just can't resolve all the issues by challenging systemic racism
Right.
itself. There has to be an internal community process too
Right.
as well. You know, you can't have it the other way as well, because
Right.
things are more interdependent.
Right.
That's the way I saw it. So I think from my perspective, that is more of our history. More of our history is you know, challenging racism, challenging a system that's broken, that maybe you can't reform, but challenging anyway,
Right.
and developing at the citizenship schools and the freedom schools,
That's right.
challenging racism. I mean, the Panther Party drew a line in the sand, as you well know.
Right.
The Panther Party also had the liberation school,
Right.
and the sickle cell anemia program,
Right.
and you know, and
Health centers. Yeah.
I think that those things could be are not mutually exclusive and are
Right.
connected to each other, and that both sides of that should challenge each other too.
And I like that, but a lot of times, a lot of our organizations or programs that try to do that have one thing that they struggle with, and that's finances.
Finances, absolutely.
That's finances. And so, how can we get our community, you know, that really we don't have much economically as a group, and the ones that maybe have a lot maybe don't want to be associated with some of those type of movements. So what are some, I guess, good ways that people who may want to get indirectly involved, but maybe don't want to get grassroots, maybe don't want to make public comment, but maybe they have some money to donate to, the People's Budget or Gideon's Army, Equity Alliance, and those type of things, PATH, those type of things. How can we encourage more people to do that, especially if they feel like they see it's a problem and our programs that are trying to be the solution to these problems just don't have the finances?
Well, that's a complicated question, because like fundraising is organizing.
Right. Right.
Charles Payne, a famous scholar who wrote about SNCC, Student Nonviolent Credit Committee, said fundraising is part of the organizing strategy and platform. So,
right.
I don't have any magic bullet to that.
Right.
I could say that the various groups you mentioned should maybe be more organized in their recruitment, but I know that they're already organized.
Right. Yeah.
In their recruitment. And, the way I see it is like, being in organizing work for so many years is something I've learned from, both younger and older activists.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, intergenerational activists is, with organizing, you have to find roles for people to play.
Okay.
And that's actually hard to do.
Right.
It really is hard to say if you have a donor
Mm-hmm.
and a military veteran, a single mother who's barely making it,
Right.
a grandmother raising her
Right.
kids, a student.
Right.
You can go down the line.
Right.
A person that you maybe grew up with at pro.
Right.
I think with the pro.
Right.
It's really hard to find creative roles for people to play as an organizer. So part of organizers, part of the training for organizers, to find ways to experiment creative roles to play, which includes identifying people able to give those kinds of resources, give those kinds of funds.
Right.
Especially in times in which where there seems to be a downturn in protests, like the last year.
Right.
Protest was called a protest wave. And there was a lot of giving,
Right.
philanthropy giving.
Right.
But when there's a downturn, or where there appears to be a downturn, that's when we can see more
Right.
resources going to those various organizations.
Right.
You mentioned. But the groups that you mentioned, I don't know what else they could have done to really profile themselves.
Right.
Get money because they've done pretty much.
Yeah. Right.
The only thing I would say is constantly finding creative roles, developing a funding infrastructure, developing a donor base, and there's a whole kind of organizing template to raise funds.
I got a controversial question for you. So I was reading Dr. Claude Anderson. I think it's Powernomics, and he had a statistic in there saying that social and economic conditioning of black folks have not improved or gotten any better really since there being more representation in politics. Can black folks really make a difference outside of symbolism and representation for a group of black folks in this country? Realistic, like I want your and what I guess, and what are those and that benefited us socially and economically, I would say specifically.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm not sure I've heard that commentary. I'm not sure I would agree with it.
And I think the timeline is like from 1968.
Yeah.
And I think when I looked at it, it went into like the early 2000s as far as that data.
The more disturbing thing I think is things like class divisions within the black community. I mean, clearly there's a group of folks in that time frame who.
Are we automatically compromised? Like when we get into these systems, are we compromised or?
Not necessarily. We don't have to be compromised. We could be prophetic. We could be prophetic.
Okay.
There was a lawmaker in Tennessee in the Reconstruction, who stood up there and went after the lynching of black folks.
Right.
And, I mean, we have examples of that. We have, the Perrin Mitchells out of Baltimore. We have the Maxine Waters. We have the Corey Bushes.
Right.
You're not automatically compromised. What's compromised is, look, the ability to make change solely within a political system that is by constitutional design is designed for things not to change.
Right.
But I know people might disagree with me. If you look at the constitutional debates, if you look at the U.S. Constitution and look at the state constitution and the chart, by design is designed for incrementalism. It's designed for slow moving change.
Right.
It's designed to they are designed to make it difficult for popular democracy to prevail. So what's change could happen, but those lawmakers will only be forced if there's mass pressure on the ground.
So
if there's mass pressure on the ground coming from them, but I think that you can do that and not be compromised.
Okay.
You can look at multiple examples.
Okay.
In the state legislature, for example,
right.
Lena Lamar, young sister Lena Lamar. I can look at the work of Free Hearts, which is a group of formerly incarcerated
women. Yeah.
Work with Senator Brittany Gilmore. I mean, they've done some of the most transformative work I think we've seen in the last 50 years. They're the only group that I've seen in Tennessee that takes legislation that they're pushing through.
Right.
At least two, maybe three.
Right.
They're the only group in Tennessee.
I think Keita Haynes is with them too, right?
They're the only group in Tennessee that I've seen that takes legislation that they are carrying with their lawmakers and takes it in the jail.
Right.
There are people in the jail for a year, 2 year period to mark up, to evaluate.
Right.
So, but change is very difficult. To happen. Yeah. No doubt about it.
Right.
No doubt about it. Change is very difficult to do, and but I think that if one is involved in so-called the political system, so to speak, then it doesn't mean that one is compromised. It just means that one is facing a barrier that they themselves may come to realize is insurmountable unless there's more community pressure.
And then that's, I think for me, that's why people ask me, Jerome, you should get into politics. Being an organizer and sitting in the rooms and having conversations with people that look like me, may come from even similar backgrounds, and just hearing and watching them continue to participate in the same things. There's harming both of us. It's like, damn. It's like you know, and that's why I had to ask you, because you've been in this so long, and I'm pretty sure people have broached you about, you know, going into running for things and stuff like that. Is that one of the reasons why you haven't, or?
No, no, my pathway is where it's supposed to be.
Okay.
That's running for office.
Right.
It's not my pathway, but I
Right.
do encourage people to get involved in politics broadly defined. Because I don't consider like electoral politics and
Right.
movement politics. I don't. There's not a hierarchy for me.
Okay.
You know, the work of Free Hearts. You know.
Right.
And the work of a council member or a law elected official.
Right.
It's, to me, it's or the work of Black Voter Matters.
Right.
Natasha Brown and Cliff Albright, and the work of Corey Bush, who just got elected out of St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
To me, there's no hierarchy.
Right.
I would encourage people to get involved in politics broadly defined, and
Right.
to broaden the scope too, because there's things like you know, chiefs of staff.
Mm-hmm.
There's there's people who just do nothing but fundraising.
Right.
I consider the work that you're doing.
Right.
I mean, important in terms
Right.
of, like, you know, blacks abroad.
Right,
I
right,
mean,
right.
That right there has a potential to shape, you know, international affairs.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
programs
Yeah.
Globally. So,
Yeah.
so to me, there's
Yeah.
not really a hierarchy of so-called institutional electoral
Right.
politics and so-called
Right.
movement politics. But on the institutional
Right.
electoral side, I would definitely encourage folks to get involved in and get engaged in. But I think that to always have a connective tissue to the movement, that is in the streets, that are clamoring, and to be willing to be challenged.
Right.
And a lot of elected officials, you know, you say something and then they you know,
Right.
it's nothing personal.
Right.
It's like, you know, in class,
Right.
come at me in class.
Right.
I make you get mad.
Right.
Heavy's the head that wears the crown.
And
you know?
and I think that's a big thing to let people know, especially when you're talking to decision makers. And that's one thing I had to learn. That it's not personal. It's just that I have a personal problem with the system that you represent, not you as a person.
The people that you probably know as a kid and grew up with, the people that you have familiarity with, if their livelihoods are going to be dependent upon public policy that
Right.
has meaning and teaching.
Right. That's just it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whether it deals with incarceration,
Right.
housing, your personal decisions around
Right.
education, it's not
Right.
like a theory. And I think that's what I was trying to convey to some folks last week about when the People's Budget, Black Movement Assembly, were bringing their demands. I mean, those young folks, this is not like a theory.
Right.
They're not there just to make a
It's
point.
right,
They're not
right.
there just to be
Right.
the hero, the shero, the heroine,
Right.
have chivalry.
Right.
When it comes to, you know, killings in the street.
Right.
When it comes to, sorry.
That's all right.
When it comes to, sorry about that.
It's okay. We're gonna stop it right quick. We don't need these batteries. Dr. Franklin is messing up the set, y'all.
You know, I get my arms.
This is a blue. Not here, but we ain't got the lights on anyway, so we good.
Yeah. Continue.
Yeah. We straight. There you go. Cool.
Yeah. Should I go? Yeah, go ahead. When it comes to, you know, things that happen in the street, those are maybe you know them, maybe you don't, but
Right.
you're probably 2 or 3 people away from in terms of your network.
Right.
One day I was canvassing in a housing development in Nashville. It must have been about going on 5.5 to 6 years ago. We were working on the Ban the Boss campaign. Literally on one end of the street, I met somebody all in an hour whose son was picked up by police and was in detention for, according to that person, 3 years.
Okay.
The police wanted her son to turn a case.
Okay.
He wouldn't turn a case. They want him to. They call it, I guess, snitch.
Right.
To turn a case to a crime that he didn't commit the crime.
Right.
she said, I'm not going to have him turn the case because his cousin was killed for doing something similar and dropped off in an area outside of town.
Wow.
And then the next block, I found a guy who was in prison during the election of 2008. He couldn't vote. We were collecting petitions for reference. He couldn't vote, but he organized a mock election in the prison just to say that those people in prison wanted to get voice during this.
Right.
What they call, they thought, they considered a transformed election.
Right.
Then by the time the next block, a woman was telling me that her brother was locked up down there downtown and needed a letter of support at 8 or 9 o'clock that next morning from somebody. And could I write it? Never met him. So I went back home, came back the next morning, and dropped off a letter.
That's powerful, though.
None of those stories are in the news.
Oh.
None of those stories none of those stories are in the news. So now my guess is that you and those other organizers are hearing some
stories. Yeah.
So when you go to speak to the decision makers, and you're trying to you're bringing pressure on them,
right?
It's not personal.
No, it ain't personal. It's real life. It's real life. Yeah,
you're gonna be accountable to people too.
Right.
And I think that's what people don't really. That's what people are not really understanding. And really, in many respects, that's where a lot of the local media don't really get to as well. But it's nothing personal.
Come on, deep dish conversations. We can talk. We can talk about it. Yeah. Well, Dr. Franklin, we got to wrap it up. We can talk all day. I know we can talk all day. But I want to just close this out. One, I want you to talk a little bit about your books that you have and what people can get them, and also kind of just what next for you, anything that you're working on, and just a good powerful word for the people to close us out.
Well, this book right here is called After the Rebellion. It's a book on black youth movements led by young black folks, students, young people, young adults. It goes really from the 1930s to the mid-2000s. It covers the Southern Negro Youth Congress in the 1930s, Sekou, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Student Organization of Black Unity. It covers the Black Student Leadership Network, the Union Summer campaigns that black folks went into in the mid-1990s. And it also covers black folks who were involved in the juvenile justice reform movements. This one right here looks at Tennessee politics primarily from 2012 and 2002 to 2012, really looking at partisan realignment, electoral realignment, and racial polarization in Tennessee. Co-authored with Ray Block, who himself used to be at MTSU. This right here is one of the proudest, not a book, it's a monograph right here. This is called The State of Blacks in Middle Tennessee. It's old, it was produced a decade or so ago. I'm very proud of that work because it involved 30 different authors. Including, about one half of them were activists. And, doing work in the streets as well. So the current work that I'm working on, if I can get it done, is I'm doing a book on, working on a project on revisiting what I call nonviolent resistance and civil resistance in the movement of the 1960s. And it looks at the citizenship school program, it looks at the poor people's movement, and it looks at a broad range of protests that occurred during that period of time. And, I also do work with voting rights litigation groups on voting rights as well.
Dr. Franklin, thank you for. I hope y'all caught these gems. Because it was a lot of them, a lot of history, a lot of knowledge, and that's why I wanted to bring Dr. Franklin on here. Again, a former professor of mine at MTSU, political science, took 2 courses with him. I can't tell you the name of them right now, but I passed. I made it out. And really, that was kind of my first introduction to learning really about political science and some of the things, and like a lot of the activism and just grassroots works, because even at that moment I didn't think I would be doing what I'm doing now. Kind of like you, I didn't have really parents. I didn't have or anybody I can know in my community really that like did activism, but you just knew like black people struggle, and I wanted to do something for my community, and here I'm in now. And so I really appreciate you. I appreciate what you do for the city of Nashville, for the state of Tennessee, and for the country, and a lot of the things you push, the things that you author. And just keep doing your thing. It's just, hey, we gotta give a black man his flowers while he here. You know, roses, a whole bushel of them things. Give him a whole garden. But nah, I really appreciate you, and I encourage everybody, if you want to get involved, just be informed. Dr. Franklin is very reachable. What's your Twitter? I know you got Twitter.
Sekou Franklin.
Sekou Franklin. And so yeah, hit him up.
I try to keep up.
Yeah. Or go to MTSU website, find his email. And here,
live in Nashville.
Live in Nashville, work in Murfreesboro, and I really appreciate you and everything that you do, and I'm glad we was able to get you on.
Thank you.
And hope you enjoyed the pizza.
Very good.
And we appreciate y'all for tuning in and watching another episode of Deep Dish Conversations, and watch the next episode. All right, appreciate it, Dr. Franklin.
Thank you.
That's a wrap, y'all.